Hello there. I'm Dr Lindsay Murray from the University of Chester and the Primate Society of Great Britain. And I'm so honoured to be speaking today with Dr Jane Goodall, Dame of the British Empire, founder of the Jane Goodall Institute and UN Messenger of Peace, and also patron of our Primate Society of Great Britain. So I know, Dr Goodall, Jane, that your PA Mary has told me that Virtual Jane is 10 times busier than the one who used to travel around the world. And with your new Book of Hope out and your podcasts and everything else you do, I can only imagine how excruciatingly busy you are. And I'm very, very grateful for you taking the time to speak with us today.
Well, I'm very happy to speak to you. And, you know, it's when I do something like this, you know, the Primate Society of Great Britain, I think back with such nostalgia to those days in Gombe, the early days, which were the best days of my entire life. And my life now could not be more different. So those days were exhausting in a different way, climbing up steep slopes and staying out all day and sometimes all night. But this kind of busyness is so much worse.
Yes, I'm sure. And being in nature, I can relate to that. I'm somebody that feels a lot better in nature, in the quiet, and very different life. But you're doing such amazing work, aren't you, for the chimps and for the people all around the world. So thank you again. So I mean, one question I suppose I would ask you, mentioning those days in Gombe. One of my students, actually, I said, I'm going to be talking to Dr. Jane Goodall. And I said, do you have a question that you'd like me to ask her? So her question was, you know, when you look into the eyes of a chimpanzee, what do you see? How does it make you feel? And related to that, I suppose, what is your most profound moment with the chimpanzees, if you can pick one or two?
That's very difficult, but looking into the eyes of a chimpanzee, you're looking into the eyes of a thinking, feeling being. You know, I mean, the eyes of many animals, actually. And of course, since those early days in 1960, when I was told at Cambridge University that I couldn't talk about chimpanzees having personalities or minds or emotions because those were unique to us, that's literally what was taught in the early 60s. And of course, I'd learned long before from my childhood teacher that simply wasn't true. That was my dog, Rusty, who's here behind me, just reminding me of the fact that we're part of and not separate from the rest of the animal kingdom. And looking into the eyes of a chimpanzee or a gorilla or the one eye of an elephant, because you can't look at both, or a whale, you know, you just know that you're looking at a sentient being. And of course, I suppose, have you seen My Octopus Teacher?
Yes.
Well, you look into the octopus eye, and again, you see a sentient being. So going back to those early days at Gombe, I suppose, quite honestly, that breakthrough moment when David Greybeard, the one who he's behind me on the other side, he'd begun to lose his fear before the others because they ran away for 4 whole months. And then I saw him on this day. I couldn't get really close, but, you know, breaking off stems of grass, using them to fish for termites, breaking off a leafy twig, carefully removing the leaves. And at that time, it was thought that humans and only humans used and made tools. So I think, you know, seeing that was just such an amazing moment, and it turned the whole research around, brought the National Geographic in. They agreed to go on funding it when my 6 months ran out. Not surprised. I'm amazed, Lewis Leakey, my mentor, that he actually got money for 6 months because I hadn't been to college. I was just out from England, and for some reason he sensed that I was the person he'd been looking for.
And switching tack a bit then, Jane, with COP26 just having finished, how do you feel about what they've achieved, and how do you think that relates to all the great work you do with your Roots and Shoots, humanitarian environmental efforts, largely focusing on the youth, which I know is one of your reasons for hope in your new book. Have they done enough is perhaps a silly question.
Well, if, big capital if they actually follow through on various commitments made, if the large sums of money that have been committed by different countries to mitigate climate change are shared out in the right way and do the right things, and are, at the moment there's no sort of guidelines as to how these things will be followed up. Yes, wonderful, America and China have agreed to work together on climate change, but how? And there's nothing solid there. So it's disappointing, but perhaps the saddest thing is that it's not surprising that it was disappointing. But lots of good people and lots of things going on in the sidelines, lots of people just meeting and saying what they actually would do.
It's undoubtedly gained momentum, hasn't it? The urgency of the situation.
Yes, and that's why I spend so much time on our youth program, because it's now in 65 countries. It's got members from preschool right through to university, and actually more and more of the big corporations are their staff are beginning to form their own Roots and Shoots groups, which is basically every single one of us makes an impact on the planet every single day. And unless we're living in dire poverty, we can choose what sort of impact we make. And every group is choosing projects to help people, to help animals, to help the environment.
Yeah, because it is all absolutely interconnected, isn't it, as you say, the rich tapestry of life. Yeah. I mean, one thing that we're doing here at the university, we've just started some new research and knowledge exchange institutes, and I'm involved with the sustainability and environment one. And we want to make big changes and sort of make our campus as carbon neutral, carbon zero as possible, and green skill our students. So, I mean, could I sort of put you on the spot and ask you what your best tips would be for, individuals in their actions and organisations like the university who really want to do good, and there's a lot of appetite and commitment for making real meaningful change? What would you suggest, Jane?
I mean, some of it's up to the administration to put funds aside for solar panels or whatever, to try and get off the grid, which is really important. And for the students, for the individual faculty, I mean, it's that Roots and Shoots message. Every day you live, you make an impact. And if you start thinking like, okay, what do I buy? And being educated, you can ask the right questions. Did it harm the environment in its production? Is it cheap because of unfair wages, so often the case, or labor, slave labor, basically? Did it harm animals? Was it cruel, like factory farming? And I think one thing that people don't always like to think about, but our desire to eat meat and more meat and eggs and milk and that kind of thing is one of the biggest destroyers of the environment that there is. And now we have billions of animals crammed into these factory farms, huge areas of land destroyed to grow the grain to feed them, forests being destroyed to create pasture for grazing cattle, water so scarce in some places, lots used to change vegetable to animal protein. And finally, they're all making methane gas in their digestion. And that's one of the very, very virulent greenhouse gases. Luckily, there's not as much of it up there as CO2, but still. And
I liked your example in the book. You said that you take your soft toy cow to show school children how methane comes out one end and food goes in the other.
Right here. Here's cow.
Oh, hello,
cow. I'm talking to kids. Food goes in here, and gas comes out. Giggle, giggle.
It's brilliant, isn't it? Simple but brilliant and so effective. Yeah.
Yeah, but the other thing we have to realize is these billions of animals in these horrendously cruel conditions, all these secretly filmed videos that are coming out, they're all sentient beings. They all have personalities, individuality. They all can feel fear and pain. And, pigs are as intelligent as dogs.
Yes,
and if anybody watching hasn't seen Picasso, not Picasso, but Picasso, please Google.
Brilliant.
Actually, do you know about Ecosia rather than Google?
Yes, it's planting trees every time you search on the net, yes.
If you say, please, Ecosia Picasso, people won't know, most people won't know what you mean. But every time you use Ecosia, they plant trees, give money to tree planting.
Talking of trees, Jane, I see you have your Trees for Jane and hoping, for a trillion trees. I mean, I had a thought about, trees for hope. Could we work together and get every educational institution to plant at least one tree of hope, and have a message for, about your work and roots and shoots to contribute to that. And
that would be great. Contribute to Trees for Jane with Trees of Hope. And if you have a tree of hope, give it a name.
Yes.
And then you'll look after it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the students and pupils would all love to play a part in that, wouldn't it? It makes it real for them, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I was going to ask, as fellow Cambridge alumni, we both would have walked through those streets like Silver Street as excited younger graduate students engrossed in our primate studies. I know in the early 90s when I was there, I already had concerns about wildlife and the planet. And I'm just thinking, what were your hopes and fears at that stage, and did they materialise?
Well, remember, I wasn't a normal student.
No.
And I didn't even live in the centre of Cambridge. I just came in for my talks with Robert Hind about my thesis. I came in as a PhD student, even though I'd never been to college. And so that was in the early 60s. We didn't have these environmental concerns because Gombe was still part of that great equatorial forest stretching across Africa. The world was absolutely different. Of course, there were problems, but they weren't out in the open. They weren't obvious, and they weren't life-threatening as they are now. It was a very, very, very different world. So my hopes and fears were, can I get through writing this thesis? Can I learn how to be a scientist, but hang on to my beliefs in the sentience of animals? How quickly can I get back to Gombe? And in fact, I was rushing back almost every vacation because Flo had baby Flint and I didn't want to miss his development. So my wasn't a normal undergraduate life because I never was an undergraduate. And I didn't really join in. I was quite just writing my thesis.
Special person, always. Can I ask as well what your secret is? Because you always do seem very serene and calm. And given that you've seen probably some of the worst of things as well as the best, how do you manage to stay positive and hopeful?
Well, I think I'm rather good at living in the moment. If you live in the moment, you're fully concentrated in the moment. The other thing is that having spent so long in the forest, there's the peace of the forest within, and it's very easy for me to close my eyes and be back there in the forest. And it's now, of course, scientifically proven, as you know, that being in nature is good for our physical and mental health. In fact, some doctors are prescribing time in nature. Japan has started this thing of forest bathing. I used to think that, what did people put on bathing costumes and run out in the forest? But I don't mean that.
Absolutely. It works, doesn't it? Lowers blood pressure, stress, depression. Absolutely.
And for some people, it's other kinds of nature. It doesn't have to be a forest. For me, it's a forest.
Yeah, the sea and everything. I mean, more people have been turning to nature, haven't they, during the lockdowns? They've been starting to appreciate it, starting to connect or reconnect with nature, which which is great. Do you think it's going to automatically make people care more and act to help because of that newfound sort of connection with nature? And do you think the best ways
on the person? I think that I think for sure since the pandemic, there's a greater awareness of the fact we need a new relationship with the natural world. I think people are beginning, and the climate crisis and loss of biodiversity is being better understood, and people are, Extinction Rebellion and Fridays for the Future and all these movements of people show that there is growing concern and a growing, how do we push our governments to make the changes that are needed? And of course, that ties in with big business.
Yes.
Big business and government have this cozy relationship. And then it ties in with agribusiness and the arms industry. There's all those things going on that one doesn't really like to think about, but they're there. But on the whole, more people are concerned now. I'm sure they are.
Yes, I agree. There's that sort of us and them element, isn't there? But I think people shouldn't give up and think that it's, the governments won't do what's necessary, so there's nothing I can do, because as you said as well, every action counts, doesn't it?
Yeah. Everything. And also, if we lose hope, we're doomed. Because if you don't have hope, you won't take action. If you don't take action, then, we're doomed, really, literally.
Absolutely. I mean, as patron of our society, do you think there's anything that we as the Primate Society of Great Britain should be doing to sort of raise awareness or send particular messages to appeal to people?
I think pushing the idea of animal sentience is something really important. And there are more people saying, well, why are some governments turning away from relying on science, and why is there all this fake news? So I think any university can have these meetings with students to talk about, what do you think you can do? Have you got an idea? And very often students come up with wonderful ideas of what to do and how to do it.
Oh, they do, yeah. Working with them as partners and collaborators is key, and it's definitely a way we want to go. Yeah. I mean, turning to the zoo question and thinking about sentience, there are good zoos and bad zoos, obviously. But what features do you sort of consider are absolutely paramount to kind of keep an animal like a chimpanzee reasonably content in captivity, and what's definitely detrimental to them? Well,
what's desperately important is that they are provided with a decent social group. That's number one, a compatible social group, and not one male with lots of females, because in the wild, males hang out. Great bonds of friendship between males, so you need more than one male.
Yeah.
But second most important is enrichment, ways to prevent boredom, because they're highly intelligent. And, if you just sit around even in a big, nice enclosure, unless you have things to do and challenges to your mind. So, we have a program you may not have heard of, but it's called Chimpanzoo.
Yeah.
And
I know everything about you, Jane.
So we just had a big meeting on it. And I began that in 1984, and there was no enrichment in the zoos back then. And I think I started the first one, or tried to, in London Zoo. I made a box replicating termite fishing with holes in the top that could be attached to the railings, and straws and things. Although they had straws, the keepers didn't use it. Do you know why? They said it's too much work to finish and clean it. Well, the keepers are different now.
Yes.
Keepers are now educated. Keepers are in that job because they love animals and not just as a job, as used to be the case. So enrichment has now gone everywhere. And what's the worst for a chimpanzee, or almost all primates actually, is to be alone, is to be in a small, barren cage with nothing to do. And there are still, unfortunately, zoos like that. But they're getting better all the time. Sometimes it's literally because they haven't got any money and they shouldn't have started a zoo in the first place. You know, using animals just to entertain and to bring money in, that's not good enough. But the good zoos are contributing a lot to conservation. Captive breeding can lead to very bad things happening, like you've got a group and they turn out to be two different subspecies of chimps.
Yes.
And so you send some away. Well, that, if you've got a nice compatible group, they don't care if they're, you know, it's like a class of children and some are African. Who send them away because they don't fit in.
I don't know if you've heard of Boris the chimpanzee, Jane, at Chester Zoo here.
Yes.
Yes. So I've been fortunate to study Boris and his group, and yes, I know what it's like, how it feels to look into his eyes, and it's absolutely special and very, very hard to articulate to others how it makes me feel. But I definitely consider him a chimpanzee best friend, and I think they're ambassadors, aren't they, as well, for the animals in the wild.
But they definitely are. I know so many people who say, well, it was being in a zoo. And okay, you can look at it all on video, and we've got all this modern technology, sort of 3D, but it's not the same as being in the presence of a contented individual in a really good situation. And the other thing is, some of these people, oh, the wild, they've got to be in the wild. That's, well, yes, but I've been in so many places where living in the wild as a chimpanzee or monkey is just terrifying. They're being hunted, they're being caught in snares, mothers are being shot to steal babies for the international wildlife trade, and you can hear the bulldozers coming to cut the trees down. That's not a life I would want. And it would be far better to be a chimpanzee in a really good zoo than in many situations where they're living in the wild.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and it's not fully appreciated by everyone, I think.
No, it's not.
And kind of linked to that, I wonder what you think about the IUCN guidelines for the images and photos that we show, Jane, of people with primates, because I know they're sort of keen that we don't show anything. Obviously, I think hopefully nobody wants to demean or belittle primates like chimpanzees. But at the same time, if we're not to show pictures of primates in sanctuaries, if we're maybe not showing their plight, then how are we to put in place your maxim of, you know, making people understand so that only then will they care and only then will they help?
I think I don't agree with some of those guidelines at all. I think our job is to educate people, to explain every picture that shows a chimpanzee or other primate or any wild animal with people should make it very clear this is a rescued animal, and not to show caregivers holding baby chimps in a sanctuary is wrong, because those infants have lost their mother and they need comfort. And they need to be cuddled. And just occasionally a sanctuary has a really good substitute mum. We had one for a while in Chimpunga, and at one time she had 8 babies following her around. She mothered them all. But very often you don't have an individual like that. When they first come in and they're sick, you can't treat them and not touch them. So what we have to do is educate people that it's absolutely wrong to take them from their mothers. But if they are taken from their mother, there must be some substitute. And how can you be a veterinarian and treat them, as they suggest, without being in contact with them? So it's you know, you don't want to show pictures with dressed up chimps, absolutely out. You don't want these stupid photographs with trained chimps who've been taught to smile. And it's not black and white.
Not.
People like to see the world in black and white, extreme people, but it's
Yeah.
not black and white. And I'm afraid this whole thing causes a lot of divisiveness.
I really do. There's so many things that you say, so many things that I read in your book resonate so much with me. And, you know, I always say that's not black and white. And my mother used to say to me, determined as I was, I can and I will. So I liked you were using that sort of together we can, together we will, to sort of, you know, call to action. And the Yellowstone example, Yellowstone's one of my favourite places, the reintroduction of the wolves to show how everything's interconnected and nature works if humans would just play their part as good custodians and guardians. So I'm so grateful. I'm conscious that we're sort of running out of time, but I feel so much respect and adoration really for you, Jane, and all that you've done. Is there anything you would like to add as a message before we close that we haven't touched upon?
Well, I think I've said them already, but one, hope is desperately important because hope leads. But hope, let me just quickly say, since I wrote that book, and people keep saying, what's your definition of hope? We are right now living through dark times, no question, environmentally, socially, politically. We're in a dark tunnel, a long dark tunnel. And right at the end is a little pinprick of light. That is hope. We're not sitting at our end of the tunnel and saying, oh, I hope that light will come to me, because it won't. We've got to climb over, crawl under, work our way around all the obstacles between us and that pinprick of light. And then we'll get there. That's hope. So it's action leading to hope. And that's something really, really important. It's not just looking at the world through rose-tinted spectacles. Oh, I hope everything will be fine. Take action to make everything fine so your hope becomes real. That's the way I look at it. And then, you know, the other message is just remember that as an individual, you do matter. And what you do does make a difference. So choose wisely and do what you can to make the world better.
Fantastic message. Thank you, Jane. So again, I'm really honoured to have spoken with you, and thank you very much for your time. I hope you take care of yourself and try to find some quieter moments. Enjoy your Johnny Walkers, and don't start off on your next great adventure anytime soon.
Now you make people curious to read the book. That's good. My next great adventure, folks, read the book, find out what it is. Anyway, it's been lovely talking to you, and congratulations on overseeing the British Primate Society, because it's important. It's very important that we learn more and more about our closest relatives. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Jane. Bye-bye. Bye.